Well, I'm delaying you from lunch, so I'm going to move quite quickly here. So hopefully you'll kind of stick with this. Just to introduce myself, most people probably know that in Ireland we actually believe we can change the entire world, and it's actually true. But it normally only works if we can partner with somebody who actually shares something that we're trying to achieve. Now, so I'm here because there are certain common things between what we're doing in Ireland at the moment and what's happening here with Mark's team in CEE. And where it basically revolves around is that we would share the same vision in terms of what should happen in the profession, what should happen in some of the practices. As institutes of credit management, we also happen to share responsibilities for bringing things to your attention or for raising the awareness of things you can do. And to cut to the chase, if you like, what we want to talk about for the next few minutes is what we call the Best Practice Initiative, which is a program that we launched in Ireland, and we're actually launching it here with Mark at the moment. Before we look at what it is, and before I ask you a question, it's probably worth looking at some of the comments that people have made. The top two comments actually come from members of staff who've actually been through the best practice, and the latter two come from the company. You will see common thread in all of the messages anyway. It's typically to do with recognition, credibility, getting some accreditation, and sometimes to do with just wanting people to realize that the job is difficult and they do the best they can. That's a target, if you like, we set out to try and deal with. Now, by way of definition, I'll use a simple definition for best practice really, which is where we've identified some process where we know consistently we can get better results than any other way. And for best in class, we will typically assume that people who are very good at best practice can become leaders in their field. Very straightforward, to be honest, in terms of a definition. But I will highlight the fact that best practice relies in its entirety on consistency and getting superior results. It's easy to get into best practice. It's not always easy to stay there. So the last item is the one where we typically get into a conversation about, should we introduce best practice as a culture change in an organization, or can it be done as a practice change? And that gives rise to the obvious question, should it be top down, or are we doing bottom up? Now, we have a very practical approach to that, which is we go directly into an order to cash function. And we believe that if that process is improved, by default, the culture in the organization will change anyway as part of that. Sorry. Just going to move this. So I have a question. I need you to use your buttons if you don't mind. And it's really to help me is to understand, as it currently stands, would your view be that your order to cash process is good, already in best practice, is best in class, or is it that you actually don't know? It would be useful information to have, as I say. So let's see what happens. And this is where my opportunity to change the world could disappear very quickly. Okay, well, that is what you would expect the answer to be, because nobody is going to say they do a bad job, which is understandable. People struggle to understand whether they are really best practice or not, because they're trying to find a benchmark that they can actually work from. So what I'd like to do is to show you what we call the Best Practice Initiative is really based on a number of very small components, which says we will take the people and the process and we'll expand on how we're going to deal with that. We'll take a program, because you don't do best practice in a day or in a week. There's an entire program here about how we start it, how we move through the process, and how we get to the end. And we do that partly through affiliation with the official body. So in other words, you become part of the CEE team, if you like, while this is actually happening. For obvious reasons, we do, of course, do things like audit. We're very good, believe it or not, at recognition, mainly because we believe that the profession needs to be advanced. So we've learned over the years how to recognize in ways that people find appealing. And that is what we call the Best Practice Initiative in its entirety. Now, sorry, why is it any different from things that you might be looking at otherwise? Well, one of the main differences is that if we go into an order to cash function for best practice, what we ask for is that every single member of the team comes through the best practice. We're not looking for the team leaders, we're not looking for some of the managers. We actually look for that very unusual balance between getting the process right and making sure that what we call a demonstrable commitment to developing the staff can be proven during best practice. So for obvious reasons, that will involve training people, but we do a lot of assessments as opposed to pure training. That is the key differentiator, the other being obviously that it's all recognized by an official body. And last, but by no means least, we don't believe that we can go into your organization and just say, here's a standard course off the shelf, and everybody has to do that. We find a way of taking the training you're trying to do with the training we're trying to do, and we put that together in the program. So I'll move these along. So to get to the core of best practice, it's a fairly simple process. We're looking at workflow, we're looking at things that you do, we're looking at procedures manuals, obviously. We're looking at what way you currently measure that. So you may already have some audit information, you may have KPIs, you may have various reports. We have to obviously look at how is the professional development and the staff development working, which gives us the next two pieces. Then where we come in, if you like, is we understand fully the business of accreditation and how to recognize people and how to award people for doing well. And we then, obviously, sorry, one of my items is out of place there. We then take the two things that we can't forget. Process improvement has to continue. Once we start best practice, we don't have a choice. If we're going to do this for 5 years, we must continually improve the process. And staff development is exactly the same issue. We can't train people and then decide not to do anything with them for the next 12 months. And that's how we get to the core of best practice. So, sorry. In terms of the benefits, like why would a company go through what we call a best practice initiative? Well, the obvious answer is that the company themselves typically are trying to gain an accreditation, and they would like it to be from a professional body. A not insignificant gain for the company is that the way we do the model, quite a reasonable contribution is made to the development of the team in terms of the way they're trained and how that training works. The individuals gain purely because they want recognition, they want individual certification. So when we give, for example, a best practice certificate to the company, every individual receives their own. And they're entitled to it because they earn it as part of the process. And the return on investment is typically to do with the fact that because we train on what you want to do as opposed to a generic course, people become more proficient in the things you need to do faster, so you can see that return pretty quickly. And we're not, as I say, we're not trying to push a particular course. We're actually dealing with a term we use called for-the-job training. Because when we go into companies, if I say to you, I'd like you to do this course, typically what people say to me is, I hired 20 people and I hired them to do this particular job. I want to train them for the job. So what we've managed to do is take your for-the-job requirement, take where an institute can help you professionally to move things up a notch, and we've put together a program that allows you to get exactly what you need, but where the profession itself is gaining a little bit from the process as well. And I'm not going to take you through all of these because I have to watch my time here. We split the training into two specific units of training. One is to do with credit management. Sometimes in your organization you may have people who are doing certificate or diploma in credit management. And typically what that means is that most of the other people they're either getting in-house training, on-the-job training, or sometimes none at all. And to deal with that, what we created was what we call the fundamentals of credit, which is a credit management course that everybody can do to bring everybody to a particular level. And it's not the lowest level, it's a slightly higher than normal. We deliver the entire thing online because you hear all morning mentions of the fact that the process is busy. We're busy, we can't release people to do anything. By going down the online route, what we've discovered is that people will fit this in lots of different ways, either into their working day or into their own time, because they value the credential at the end of it. And it's not a simple, let's read lots of material online. Every single unit of learning is followed by online assessments, and they're quite detailed. and they're quite searching sometimes in terms of whether people are actually learning anything from the material or not. And as an organization, you have full visibility into the progress that each person is making as well. So you know if they're actually moving at a reasonable pace, you know if they're struggling. Now, it's all hinged on something similar between Ireland and here. In Ireland, we have what we call a statement of capability, which is an online way of detecting what do people know, where are the areas of weakness. Here they have a skills matrix, which is exactly the same process, just done slightly different way. But it does allow us to tailor the material to fit. The business rules, we take the current procedures manuals, and what we do is we move them into online mode, but by moving it, we change the way somebody actually learns the procedures, because it has to move away from just being a reading model to some way of learning and being able to assess that they're learning from the procedures. We tend to find that that's actually quite successful, but what it typically shows is that no matter what you think of your procedures, when we ask questions, what we discover is they need to be refined. So an upside, if you like, of this is that the procedures do actually improve as part of the process as well. And certification and CPD, for example, CPD is typically associated with the more professional end in the best practice world, because lots of your staff are not necessarily going down the professional route yet. We still use CPD as a way of keeping them in best practice. So in other words, we will expect the company to be prepared to put people through some extra things. It may be as simple as an assessment, it may be a re-evaluation of what they learned last year, but it happens every single year with a view to keeping people current and up to speed. Sorry, one of the things we introduced, because visually what we discovered was that I can grant a certificate to somebody who has completed best practice. And that's nice, people take it, they put it in a folder, they use it in their CV, whether we like it or not, but they've earned it. What we have done is we've introduced what we call a CPID, which is an online passport, if you like, in credit management. And what it holds is the information on the accreditations that you've achieved. And the difference between that and a printed certificate, if you like, is that if I give my CPID to a prospective employer, for example, or to a recruitment agency, I can grant them permission to check my CPID. When they check it, the check is done directly to the institute that granted it to see if it's still current. So in other words, I can prove that I am accredited, I'm still a member of the institute, my accreditation is up to date. And that online verification, we see that as something that will become more important, because initially recruitment agencies, for example, expressed an interest in saying, how do we verify that somebody is what they say they are, because they struggle sometimes trying to find out how to match somebody for credit with the actual requirements. That CPID is part of the process that we've got. Just before I ask you a kind of a final question, the best example that I could bring here today is I'm working with an organization at the moment that's a legal firm, very prominent legal firm in Ireland, is in the collection business, very well known internationally, and approached us originally to talk about best practice. The obvious thing from best practice is what I can say to him, which is where I can say, look, I can see why this gives you credibility, I can see why this helps you with staff retention, all the usual things, if you like, that are on the brochure. What's more interesting is the comment from Hugh J. Ward himself, because Hugh currently liaises with 93 countries. And what he wants to be able to do is have something consistent that he can say, you know, I have gone through this process and this process is recognized. Now, the fact that we're now launching it here with Mark and his team means that this kind of moves away from being, if you like, a dream that it is possible to have an accreditation that works everywhere, to being a reality at this point in time. So before I move into my kind of closing stuff, what I'd like to do is ask you, based on the little information I've given you, I would be now curious as to how you feel this best practice initiative might work for your organization. And my curiosity, if you like, is Do you think it would work well? Might work? Would not work at all? Or you're not really sure? If you wouldn't mind. Very good. Now, I would expect that answer, because nobody is going to jump into best practice without questioning exactly how it works. And it's not possible for me in 15 minutes to give you what took 2 years to put together as a program, right? But it's better than people saying, I don't know, because the might at least means that we have a chance to make something happen. So, two simple things. All through the presentations today, you hear about how busy people are in order to cash. And when I go into a company, typically the first thing people say to me is, we're not going to be able to fit this in. You know, we're too busy. I'm in one company with 80 staff, and the problem is, you know, how do we release 80 people for training, for example? Now, we have to accept that you don't get to best practice too easily. And it shouldn't be about getting it easier. It should actually be about getting it better in reality. But the last one there is kind of more interesting, because when we started this first, the immediate reaction, both from, say, colleagues in the institutes as well as from companies, was it's absolutely impossible. You know, you can't go into a busy order to cash function and you can't get them to a different position. It gradually moved to, it's possible, but it won't work. And now we have companies that are already in there, and it's very easy for people to say, I always said it was a good idea. Now, what I'm hoping is that for people here, that we'll manage to prove to you over time that it is actually a good idea, and it's at least worth exploring, so that you can figure out how can it be used in your organization. So just by way of wrapping up, I'm going to be here with Mark's team and Andre on the desk outside. There are forms which have been left on your desk in relation to professional and how ACC is approaching that. There's a contact form available, and what we'd like to do is get as many contacts as we can so that we can answer as many questions as we like. So hope I kind of stuck to your schedule. Am I okay?